Pat Romano and Kim Samard have actually presented before. They're both from Dawson College, and now they're joined by Sue Elmsley from Dawson College in talking about their work. I'll let them introduce their center. I'll just say a little few words about who they are, but I'm always glad to have them. As I was saying before, it's always great for us Americans to tip across the border and see what Canadians are doing and what we can learn from Canadians. Sometimes the Americans are like, what we can teach Canadians, and I'm all like, what we can learn from Canadians might be a better way for Americans. So Kim is at once a teacher, filmmaker, community activist who has presented in practice in global context, currently involved in pedagogical projects in Montreal. She is making a habit of learning from her students and colleagues at Dawson College. Pat has a master's degree in political science and is a member of the humanities department at Montreal's Dawson College. She currently teaches courses on women in war, violence and nonviolence, and the ethics of varied responses to historical wrongs. She has worked on a number of college peace building projects over the years and is the co-founder of the Resist Violence Project, which is the big thing that they're involved in. And finally, Sue teaches literature and creative writing at Dawson College. She's authored 3 poetry books, Museum of Kindness, I, Nadia, and Other Poems, winner of the A.M. Klein Prize, and When Your Body Takes to Trembling. Sue's poems appear in Alongside We Travel, Contemporary Poets on Autism. So I welcome all 3 of you here. Before we get started and I turn it over, I just want to remind people, and I'm going to do it right away, is rename your nameplate with your name, maybe where you're from and your pronouns. And also every day we're having a slightly different group of people. So go ahead and reintroduce yourselves in the chat box. Go ahead and do that. That would be really helpful. I am going to, this is being live streamed, and I'm going to start that now so that we have that, and we will have a transcript of that later on that people can see. And those are probably all the preliminary things I have to do. So that's plenty. So Pat, I'll turn it over to you, and we welcome you from right across the border. So thank you for being here.
Our pleasure. We're really happy to be back. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim because she does our introductions.
Okay.
So really short, but hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone. So we're trying to make this interesting. We're doing it kind of like a performance art style, and we have some interesting kind of slides to show at the same time. So I just wanted to make sure that's working, and I would suggest that you put your view into speaker view if you have the option to do that. So right now, I just wanted to make sure that you see what I'm sharing. So you see, and if I always, I'm kind of, now that we're teaching in person again, I've forgotten here. So are you still able to see that? Okay, good. And it looks like a full screen kind of thing. Okay, great. Awesome. So we'll get started with that. So thanks again for having us. So we will start the title of our presentation is called Bringing the Theory and Practice of Social Change into the Classroom. And here we go. I celebrate teaching that enables transgressions, a movement against and beyond boundaries. It is that movement which makes education a practice of freedom.
We need to develop radical pedagogy. This is about strategy. This is about getting the work done. The Association of American Colleges and Universities, 2020.
The aim is to reframe issues through experience. Identity is an important part of us, but when we are speaking through experience, through emotion, you are putting everyone on the same plane.
Art invites us to think rather than telling us what to think. This is one of its great powers. And if you make your art accessible and beautiful enough, people will want to follow where it goes. And because they themselves are deciding where to go with it, they'll more easily connect it to their own experience.
What if the classroom worked like a nonviolent movement? What if educators assumed resistance from students and worked to engage from an emotional place to encourage openness to new perspectives?
What if the class took a multidisciplinary approach, embracing theoretical, creative, and research-based perspectives and practices?
What if students made educated choices about which forces to resist? What if students were invited to be the expert, asked to be storytellers, artists, and activists?
What if vulnerability and surprise were embraced, acknowledged, and studied?
This is what nonviolent movements do. Is this what classrooms can do too?
At this point, we'd like to share a song with you. It was written and recorded by a student during the winter 2021 term in a course using the resist violence pedagogy. Be warned, there's a bit of foul language. Hopefully it won't be too offensive. I will share that with you now.
I'm so sick of all this POC. I don't understand why they just can't see me for me. I know brothers who had it way worse than me, but we stand together when racism is all we ever see. Some of us is trying to find some peace, but others had enough, so they picking up the piece. Now they take it to the streets, they don't want to hear us speak. So just let me tell my story, you can see just what I see. Now wait first, let me say, I don't gotta be religious if I got a certain name, but I'm proud of my name and I know from where it came, but I still been hated for it, and that hate just bring me pain. I was 7 years old when I was chilling on the beach in Florida. Got caught a terrorist and a foreigner. They was wishing me dead. Somebody called a coroner. They kept staring at me without a warrant. And they didn't get it. I was 7, saying go to hell, cause I ain't wanted in heaven. I ain't never did nothing. They don't know where I'm from, but they assume based on the views that they were regulated. Now listen, on to the next. I was 14 when I got put under arrest. I was late for the bus, so I ran across the street. A cop told me to stop, so I didn't move my feet. He asked for ID, I didn't have it. He asked me for my name, I told him, he started laughing. He said, let me check the system, and he started to type. I wonder would this have happened if I was a little more white. Yeah, now let's move on. I've been all around the world, but the biases in some places just stay strong. So I don't stay long, cause in the airport, they often check me twice, and I just try and stay calm. Yeah, put me in a separate line. They check me twice, they about to do it third time. I used to ask why, so I guess I never learned. Now I look in the line, it's all Middle Easterns, and I guess I fit the description. My last name Muhammad, so I guess that's where I fit in. No violence was the reason, I saw my heart keep bleeding. I'm so fucking sick and tired of shit, I'm on my knees, God, I'm pleading. Yeah, what to do? I got like 10 more stories I could go and tell you, but I'm sitting here asking like, God, what's the point? I done been through so much, all I got is my voice. Now I don't know what to do. I keep trying to stand tall, but I might be through. But no matter what happens, I'ma get up. This shit just never ends. I swear I'm fucking fed up. I'm so sick of all this POC. I don't understand why they just can't see me for me. I know brothers who had it way worse than me, but we stand together when racism is all we ever see. Some of us is trying to find some peace, but others had enough, so they picking up the piece. Now they take it to the streets, they don't want to hear us speak. So just let me tell my story, you can see just what I see.
So the incredible music that you just heard was written and recorded by Dawson student and resist violence alumni Caden Cesar Mohammed. We'd like to thank him for allowing us to present his work alongside our presentation today. And thank you all for being here. We are attempting to make this interesting and creative by sharing multiple voices and stories that motivate a group of teachers and students in the resist violence community of practice at Dawson College in Montreal. Although the whole group cannot be here, myself, Kim Simard, I'm the co-founder of the pedagogy and cinema communications teacher, and Pat Romano, the other co-founder and humanities teacher, as well as Sue Elmsley, who is an English teacher and published poet, We will share our voices about a pedagogical approach that to addressing complex social issues that we strongly believe in. At the end of our presentation, if time permits, we'll briefly introduce the Resist Violence website and maybe have a short Q&A. At this time, however, we'd like to share with you the recounting of a tragic shooting that took place at Dawson College in 2006, and a teacher's commitment to herself and her students after it happened.
My experiences that semester have had a big impact on my teaching, shaped my commitment to this pedagogy, to finding ways, effective ways to find connections across the myriad of us's and them's we build, we all build, and engage my students in actively resisting the ideas that justify violence against others. But I also learned one particular lesson. The semester was difficult. So many of us had students who had been injured or knew someone who had been shot, or were friends with Anastasia D'Souza, the young woman just beginning her college students who had been killed, or with James Santos, the young man who had spoken with a gunman, begging him not to shoot her a second time, saying, "You don't need to be doing this. There are other ways. I can help you." Everyone was on edge. Any sudden loud noise made people jump. Rumors flew, including one about a black trench coat left outside the college with a note saying, "Dawson, it's not over." In this context, I was teaching a course on the issues of war and peace. It was going well. Students expressed that they were glad I was not avoiding the topic of the shooting. But a few weeks later, when I began to speak about how a person can become capable of taking another human life, how militaries turn recruits into soldiers ready for battle, my usually engaged students went silent. I vividly remember the moment. I looked at them like deer in the headlights, I thought, and I felt so irresponsible, so foolish. How could I have gone this far? After class, I hurried to talk to one of the trauma counselors we had on campus. His words have remained with me since. Yes, one of your students might be triggered by the material in the classroom, but if they are, then they would be triggered at some point. There are potential triggers everywhere. And if it happens while in school, there's support for them. And your class, what you're teaching is so very, very important. You are helping your students to understand what happened. And understanding makes healing possible. Don't stop.
Triggers everywhere. We should assume that many of our students have firsthand experience with violence. Statistics Canada in 2019 reported that more than 11 million Canadians have been physically or sexually assaulted since the age of 15. 39% of women and 35% of men specifically. One of the members of our community of practice, Annick Legault, who is a psychology teacher, can't forget a moment when speaking in her developmental psychology class of corporal punishment and the process of habituation, whereby one gets used to stimuli in the environment. A student spontaneously declared, "I never got used to being beaten in the shower by my mother, never." As we can imagine, our colleague felt her heart sink because she had in mind kind of like the slap on a wrist or something like that when someone goes to try to get a cookie from the cookie jar. Discussing society's many injustices is difficult in a classroom where some have been harmed by them. Others perhaps have done some harming, and numerous others remain largely unaware or absolutely certain that any wrongs done in the world were not done by their people. The potential for triggering traumatic memories of some or provoking in others feelings of guilt, shame, resentment, anger, or sense of superiority vis-a-vis those who don't get it is always present. For the educator who seeks to create a space where all feel heard, where the potential for harm is minimized as much as possible and the opportunities to find interconnections, agency, and a shared commitment to bringing necessary change maximized, the challenge is really huge. In the Resist Violence community of practice, our starting point has been to think more about denial.
Silence, anger, disengagement, denial, each a common psychological process that can be activated automatically when we are faced with something that challenges our existing ideas and values. Cognitive dissonance. This happens to all of us. We either hold two conflicting attitudes or we are confronted with our behavior contradicting with our attitude. This situation creates extreme discomfort, as our colleague Anik made us aware. Since discomfort is so unpleasant, all of us are motivated to do anything to reduce it. We either change our behavior, change one of our cognitions, or add consonant cognitions. We will go to extreme lengths to reduce the discomfort, denial, distortion, and justification, as Aronson et al. Have argued in 2021 or 2022. It says 2022.
More modern research using functional magnetic resonance imagery technology has allowed researchers to locate what parts of the brain are activated when we are in a state of cognitive dissonance. The striatum and other highly specific areas within the prefrontal cortex are either activated or shut down. Basically, when we are in a situation of dissonance, the areas responsible for planning, reasoning, and decision-making are turned off, while the emotion circuit is shining bright when consonance is restored. So this means we can't think rationally when we are in denial. We're trying to justify our attitudes and behaviors while facing dissonance. In states of denial, sociologist Stanley Cohen emphasizes the ordinariness of denial, arguing that the interesting question is not, why do we shut out, but why do we ever not shut out? Cohen explores the human tendency to deny more fully in describing some of the different forms denial can take. For example, in regards to what exactly is being denied, this could imply the facts themselves, as in climate change isn't happening. The full significance of what happened, as in it wasn't rape, or a dismissal or minimization of the psychological, political, or moral implications that should follow, as in this all happened in the past, let's just move on. The very persistence of denial reveals the difficulties of creating a classroom environment where students open up to new ideas, particularly when they connect to systems of privilege and disadvantage. In such a case, how productive is it to tell them they are wrong by repeating one more time the facts?
Stop me, oh, stop me if you think that you've heard this one before.
A teacher wants to bring up social issues that have a multitude of complexities and censors themselves for fear that conflict will erupt. Or a past experience of a student hijacking the class about racism with harmful all lives matter rhetoric makes the topic taboo in a teacher's repertoire. A teacher is evaluated for being too political or controversial and moves their practice and research away from a topic that they're passionate about.
I was a young teacher going over the impact media has on culture in the context of an intro-level communications class. As we started a brief discussion to encourage participation, we talked about sports and the ads that enforce unrealistic concepts of masculinity. All was seemingly going well. Students were interested. They were provoked in the way I had anticipated. Then I explicitly made the link to these kinds of messages in rape culture. A very disturbed young man in the back blurted out, "There's no such thing as rape culture, come on." The class went silent. And with time running out, I tried to wrap up the conversation by asking why this was something he felt so strongly about. He responded by leaving the room. For the week that followed, I tried to find every piece of media that I could to prove how real rape culture was. There was a YouTube video gone viral at the time with the Halifax Frosh Week group chanting, "No means yes, yes means anal." One of many examples I was prepared to show the class to prove something that I assumed most had already accepted. But he didn't show. He dropped, he switched, or I'm really not sure what happened. His fragility struck me though, and his extreme reaction kind of scared me, to be honest. So I started censoring myself in class, skating around terms I thought might be too offensive. I tried to find ways to justify this approach, even though it was truly not one that suited me and was not particularly effective. And then there were events in the college and beyond that kept prodding me, reminding me of the reasons for my commitment to engaging in social issues that affect us all while in the classroom. one of the first things that I encountered was that a colleague of mine had made the wrong move when a student tried to make a sexual harassment claim. He said something along the lines of, "You're an attractive young lady. Thought you'd be used to these kinds of advances." And then there was this. It was the CNN judge, on CNN they were talking about the judge suggesting that a man keep her knees together. I don't know if anyone remembers that. And then I was on the metro. Metro is what we call the subway in Montreal. So I was on the subway, and there was like an ad that was very similar to this, making reference to meat and women and all that kind of stuff. And then I just couldn't keep it quiet anymore. I had to find a way to bring this up in the classroom again. It was just all around me and I was seeing it everywhere. So I decided to show my students this.
Oh my God, is this image really being presented in class right now?
Yes, I know about this campaign. Are we going to study this?
Panties.
Not more about consent. We did the stupid workshop. Why can't we just get over it?
This is so thong.
To be continued.
In our community of practice, we discussed ways to frame violence to promote psychological safety for all, such as by providing a wider historical and cultural perspective, whether in terms of pulling apart the language to reveal how the meaning of words change over time, place, and culture, or by looking at the deep historical roots of systems that continue to privilege some at the expense of others. We explored the value of drawing out interconnections between different forms of violence, shifting from the personal to safer academic discussions and vice versa, and using art and storytelling to bring in the element of surprise so that students' psychological defenses were not already in place, filtering out material that was too threatening. While we explore the harm inflicted by structural and cultural forms of violence in a resist violence classroom, we never assume who is privileged in our classroom, and recognize that those most resistant to social justice issues, typically white, heterosexual young men, are often themselves feeling overwhelmed by their insecurities, shaped by such experiences as early abuse, relentless bullying, of family poverty, and buttressed by harmful expectations about masculinity. Essentially, we ask ourselves whether, as Allison, a 3D animation teacher in her community of practice, phrased it, would I become a more effective pedagogue if I made a greater effort to better understand why some students resist me? This was bringing everyone to what is perhaps most interesting, but also provocative about the resist violence pedagogy, specifically its foundation in the theory and practice of nonviolence. Nonviolent theorists call for us to maintain a distinction between an individual and their actions or ideas, acknowledge the possibility for all of us to change profoundly and inspire us to see ourselves in the other. In other words, to look for the we rather than the us and them.
Finding these interconnections or keeping alive a shared common humanity in all situations proved to be more contentious than we had anticipated. Can we really say that a we exists within systems of injustice, or does this move us into the dangerous place where the power differentials, the privileges accrued by some, and the serious wrongs done to others are glossed over, as Allison drew our attention to? At best, perhaps we should see those positioned differently within unequal systems as potential allies. But given the relationships of power enveloping them, the collaborations themselves remain inherently unstable. This doesn't seem a solid basis for suggesting the necessary existence of a we. Allison expressed her misgivings about being asked to find the we in a classroom.
She explained, "We is the one pronoun I ask students to avoid, unless they are working in a team. The I demands positionality, and the you is a call to engagement. We makes me suspicious. When I hear or see the word, I worry about the elision of multiple points of view or the oversimplification of an argument. But really, my distress stems from the experience encapsulated in an article called The Politics of We by Mariana Tregovnik, which argues the we as a rhetorical device either ignores or demonizes individuals or groups it excludes, while repressing politics of inclusion obliges members to deny parts of themselves.
This we, though it is really the device of us, very far from the nonviolence ideal of a shared humanity. And as Allison's explorations went on, she eventually concluded,
we cannot assume that any we pre-exists, or that we are in agreement and working to the same end, or that a we that ignores internal differences can or should be protected. Yet collective action is essential to effect lasting change. To build a we from disparate parts is a challenging, painful, courageous, and perhaps unending process. Still, the only we's that attract me or that I consider possible are polyvocal, self-making, transformative, and transforming arrangements of diverse actors that respect, listen, challenge, and learn from one another. Those we's need to be cherished, nurtured, and open to expansion.
This idea brings us beautifully back to the nonviolent theorist's view of the we. For those following in the tradition of Gandhi or Martin Luther King, the we exists. It is richer than an alliance forged by common goals, but one founded on a deep faith that broken relationships can be repaired, that reconciliation between enemies is possible. Of course it takes work. It will never be realized unless prejudice, indifference, fear, and hatred are eliminated. But it is a vision that, if awakened, can inspire us to try.
I was teaching a poetic form known as the villanelle, a tightly structured 19-line poem with 2 repeating refrain lines. When I showed a villanelle called Larkspur by Rachel Rose and published in her collection Giving My Body to Science, things heated up in my class. The poem's speaker recounts to a woman named Ellen, who the poem is dedicated to, what happened when Ellen was moving into her first apartment in Brooklyn. Ellen was attacked by a stranger, nearly choked and sexually assaulted. The poem speaker says, the door was left ajar. He forced your legs apart. Ellen was left with finger marks on her throat. In our discussion of the dramatic situation of the poem, one student, a young woman, took issue when I said that Ellen was sexually assaulted. She put down her pen and spoke up. She was raped. She was raped, she emphasized in several different ways. Suddenly, this was a discussion about more than a poem. The tension in the room was palpable. Perched on the edge of a table at the front of the classroom, I could feel my adrenaline kick up. What was at stake here? Did the student perceive in my use of the term sexual assault an effort to try to deny a victim's experience or sanitize what happened to her? I was definitely being challenged, and with a degree I felt of hostility. I don't know if I answered in the best way. I forgot to take a breath, could feel my heart pounding, and I'm sure my brow was furrowed. I didn't disagree with the student. It is a poem about rape, but I first defended my use of the term sexual assault, citing Canadian law. Quote, Canada has a broad definition of sexual assault. It includes all unwanted sexual activity, such as unwanted sexual grabbing, kissing, and fondling, as well as rape. Then I pointed to the poem. Quote, he forced her legs apart. We can surmise what happened, I said, but that's all the poem says overtly. I might have and should have invited the student to make her case, point to other evidence in the poem to support her assertion. Well, she could have pointed out that the poem speaker says to Ellen, the evidence was intact. Your family was called to the emergency ward, which suggests that Ellen might have undergone an evidentiary exam or rape kit. I sensed that approaching the poem sort of clinically, treating it analytically by focusing on the evidence might have been construed as a challenge to the victim. I feared giving this impression, not sure if I was capable in the moment of saying that this is precisely one of the things that Rachel Rose highlights in her poem. The problematic way that sexual assault survivors are treated after a crime for which there are statistically very few convictions. The poem says, who walked out was never caught. And how, despite collective efforts to deny or erase the trauma, it recurs for the survivor like the refrains of the villanelle form itself. I tell students that the moments they snag on in a poem are the most significant. As Robert Frost said, the poem is nicked for meaning there. But it was near the end of the class and we stopped before resolving our discussion. And though part of me wished we could pick it up next time, we couldn't. It was the exam date. And then after that, I felt that it would have just been awkward. Did I lose an opportunity to discuss what was really at stake in the students' resistance to my characterization of what happened? This was before the Me Too movement, but we could all feel the rising tide. Did I settle on a legalistic defense? Reading poems is about considering the evidence in the poem, I thought. But how did the woman who asked the question and how did everyone else in the class feel about our exchange?
Well, we are all work in progress. In reconceptualizing complicity in the social justice classroom, Michelanos Zimbalas argues that we need to stop treating complicity as a problem to be solved and start treating it as a fact of our civic life to learn to live with. He adds, this implies, for instance, that rather than structuring our lives in ways that focus on avoiding complicity altogether, we should recognize that this is an inevitable aspect of political life, and we are all already complicit in all kinds of ways to unjust acts.
Bowler agrees, noting that, quote, education is not effective if it is combative and alienating. Adding that if as educators we shatter someone's familiar and comfortable worldview in compassion, we need to replace the vacuum with something else. She goes further, suggesting that we need to offer our students a sense of, quote, critical hope. She quotes one of her angry, defensive white male students who told her at the end of the semester that he wished she had told the class that, quote, all these screwed up things in the world could possibly change.
Zimbalas expresses it this way. If the issue is how to handle white students' denial of complicity, the pedagogical question at hand is not, what can I as a teacher do to reaffirm students' moral agency so that they admit their complicity, but rather, how can I, as a teacher, move my students to take action in their everyday lives to refuse being complicit in social harm?
So I'm on Facebook, like sometimes people do, and I see that a former student of mine posted in despair, I can't take all of this bad news. I want to just crawl into a ball and try to forget about the state of the world. So I decided to reply, and I said, I wrote a little something and I said, have you tried focusing on the resistance to all of these things? Photographs, poems, music, artwork can evoke our emotions and help us reflect in a profound way. All art forms have the potential to document and present change, as well as usher in possible alternatives. A young man in my classroom had an idea for a project on objectification. It was a commentary on the over-sexualization and commodification of women in rap music and culture. On the day of the pitch to the class, he waited until the very end to speak. He presented the idea of reappropriating album covers, replacing the revealing images of women with men to make a point. Then sheepishly, he said, I kind of feel bad presenting this idea because I'm white and I'm a guy, you know? What? No, erupted a voice in the back of the class. It was the voice of a Black female student. It can't just be me, she said. We all have to fight this together.
All creative forms, especially those that speak to a collective, have the potential to inspire people to resist. Poet W.H. Auden famously wrote these lines: "For poetry makes nothing happen. It survives in the valley of its making, where executives would never want to tamper, flows on south from ranches of isolation and the busy griefs, raw towns that we believe and die in. It survives, a way of happening, a mouth." Since 1991, a poetry festival in Colombia has been transformative in a community that was plagued by violence. In Medellin, Colombia, different forms of art, such as murals, and especially poetry, have been a way of happening, a mouth to counter violence. In his article titled "Medellin's Poems of Peace" in The Guardian, critic Benjamin Ball writes about this surprise phenomenon. Quote, "Medellin is the world capital of poetry. This is no small achievement. In 1991, Medellin, the capital of Colombia's mountainous coffee region, was the most violent city in the world and a global center for drug trafficking. Festival organizer Fernando Rondon told me it was founded in this context as a form of cultural resistance, a voice for peace, and a protest against injustice and terrorism, including state terrorism. The festival is now the largest of its kind in the world. Over 8 days, free poetry recitals are held in public parks, university theaters, high security prisons, and schools and libraries in poor, marginalized suburbs. To date, Medellin has hosted 820 poets from 142 countries and many indigenous nations. Colombia is still a volatile country, but Medellin is no longer a place where the majority live in fear."
People turn to art, even under horrific conditions, searching for ways to express their humanity, oppose the status quo, motivate others, and inspire hope for a better future. But of course, artistic forms of resistance are not sufficient in themselves to bring down systems of injustice. And in Colombia today, we are witnessing a resurgence in the population's anger over the unaddressed social and economic inequalities in society. Nonviolence has many tools in its toolkit. The value of storytelling in art is that it can open up new ways of thinking and being, creating the foundations for the groundwork of social change to take hold. And as such, it has immeasurable value for activists and educators.
Nonviolence theory and practice. Nonviolence as a strategy for social change. Nonviolence is a foundation for our pedagogy. The term nonviolence provokes many responses.
"Nothing to think about here. I'm not violent."
What is there to talk about? Teaching is nonviolent.
"I'm not advocating violence, but be realistic. Do you think that the powerful will just give up their privileges?"
What is missing for many, perhaps most of us, is a real understanding of how transformative social change actually takes place, or much awareness really about the history of nonviolence. Susan Niemann's Learning from the Germans is an enlightening exploration of what peoples addressing the legacies of institutionalized systems of racism can learn from Germany's efforts to confront meaningfully their own. She examines the strengths, but also weaknesses of Germany's approach, one being the failure to inspire the next generation with the possibilities of resistance, even to the Nazis. There are many monuments, street and school names throughout Germany to commemorate the Munich University students, Hans and Sophie Scholl, who were arrested and executed for printing and distributing anti-Nazi leaflets. These are in contrast to a single monument that stands in a little park on a side street, usually empty, that remembers the bravery and triumph of hundreds of non-Jewish wives who protested in February 1943 in Berlin, right next to the SS headquarters, the arrest and soon to be deportation of their Jewish husbands. They came every night after work for more than a week. They were heedless to the Gestapo guns that were brought out to confront them. And although mostly forgotten by history, they prevailed. Their efforts led to the release of their husbands by a regime worried about inciting larger societal opposition. Their story for Germans, in contrast to the Schall's, is much more threatening. It challenges the widely held narrative that resistance to the Nazis was doomed to fail. In fact, its memory perhaps raises some uncomfortable questions for all of us. But at the end of the day, it also inspires us to think of new possibilities. Nonviolence, so often devalued and dismissed, has a transformative power that few of us recognize. To reclaim its power, nonviolence must be understood as including actions that are simultaneously without violence and against violence. Its capacity to be forceful, even coercive, yet restrained. To oppose unjust systems while respecting individuals. To be disruptive and at the same time constructive. Or as feminist and nonviolent activist Barbara Deming put it in her brilliant 1968 essay on Revolution and Equilibrium, to resort to power while engaging conscience. This creates the unexpected, spaces where real change becomes possible. Contemporary nonviolent activist and theorist Ellen Binthagen argues that these dualities are most visible in actions that are not only without and against violence, but also beyond violence. And this is where art and activism can be powerfully combined and brought into the classroom. I'm so sorry, I thought it was on. How that's happening. Sorry.
Stephen Duncombe and Steve Lambert from the Center for Artistic Activism acknowledge that the term artistic activism seems like an oxymoron. But like most paradoxes, it contains a deeper and more incisive truth. At first glance, these aims seem at odds with one another, and I'm quoting, "Activism moves the material world, while art moves the heart, body, and soul. In fact, however, these are complementary. Social change doesn't just happen, it happens because people decide to make change." Continuing the quote, "The ability of artistic activism to surprise us, to show up in unlikely places, for example, not a gallery, or to take unfamiliar forms, for example, not a protest, march, creates an opportunity to bypass seemingly fixed political ideas and moral ideals and remap cognitive patterns. Surprise is a moment when hearts can be touched and minds reached, and both changed."
Meanwhile, back in the classroom, a class about media and rape culture, I showed the "this is not consent" image again. And I asked a few key questions. Students' reflections on this campaign and the use of artistic activism allowed for students to enter into a complex discussion about a difficult topic from a common starting point. Although everyone brought their own interpretations or their own impressions, each person left with the understanding that this is a reaction to something profoundly biased in many cultures. They can research the campaign's motivation. They can discover the story of the defense attorney in Ireland using a woman's choice of panties as a justification for rape. They can research why so many sexual assaults are not reported. They can study the resistance to this thing we call rape culture without the conversation becoming polarized or hurtful. In my class, sometimes people have tried to make their own statements around this, and it has ended up looking kind of cool, I thought. So here's an example of something that was made by a student of mine a couple of years ago. Here's another example. And if we inspire people enough, or we inspire students enough, oftentimes that shell that they create can be punctured. And if for a short moment you can get in there and get them creating this kind of stuff, it can be really powerful.
Art can connect people. We know from a 2004 RAND study that, quote, the communicative nature of the arts, the personal nature of creative expression, and the trust associated with revealing one's creativity to others may make joint arts activities particularly conducive to forging social bonds and bridges across social divides. Using stories and art in the classroom offers safe spaces for silent contemplation and personal growth. Suddenly, a student who felt angry or powerless about a certain issue feels compelled to make work that will get people to think about it in a different way and possibly act towards a shared goal. There is strength in creating that thing, and even more in learning how to express one's truth in a space while others are taking the same risk. By engaging in this activity with our students, we explore agency, creativity, vision, and vulnerability as a team, admitting when things are not where we might want them to be.
Probably more than anything else, it has been the continued engagement by many of our students with the ideas and practices of our pedagogy long after the class has ended that has inspired us to keep developing this project. This beautiful and thought-provoking work is made by Tea Castretaro, who goes by Flinty Faye, and you can find them online, flintyflay.com. Who spoke to us recently about the importance of the arts and self-expression during times of crisis, stating that they use art a lot to deal with feeling insignificant or not being able to bring change, and that having something physical can be comforting. For Tea, their artistic activism has become an essential part of life, including their professional life, and it has become a habit.
The use of the word habit is significant here. Sarah Ahmed, who in Living a Feminist Life asks us to create more equal relationships with one another, describes whiteness as a habit. And habit links to the latest research in prejudice studies. 30 years ago, psychologist Patricia Devine first defended the idea that people could be unconsciously racist. Skeptical of the significance of interventions that seek to directly change implicit or unintentional biases, as she refers to them now, Devine asks us to consider them an unwanted habit to be broken through a combination of motivation, awareness, and effort. We think this strategy offers further insights into the power of the resist violence pedagogy. As students' awareness of the suffering inflicted by violence in its many forms increases, they are also encouraged to pay attention to the violence that shapes their lives, reflect on the possibility of change, and actively begin to find creative ways to resist violence. They are potentially developing an everyday habit of resistance.
This is what nonviolent movements do. This is what classrooms can do too. That the present driving force of today's activism is young people reminds us that of the necessity of making more room for this kind of experience regularly in the classroom. The beauty of studying and engaging in artistic activism is that no one has to be an expert, but everyone finds connections with one another by trying.
You have a poem to offer.
It is made of action. You must search for it.
Run outside and give your life to it.
Thank you for your time. Here are the works cited. We can send that to whoever would like. And our website is resist-violence.com. Please go there. Have a look at the stuff we've got there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue Kim. That was wonderful. It made me try to find my Gene Sharp collection. I remember. You know, this is the quintessential book, Power and Struggle, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I still have ancient copies of the go-to. But thank you. It made me. I was really struck by the collective we and how we look at we and how Gandhi looked at we and how important it is to think a more expansive view of that. But I want to go to people's questions that people have. Just open your mics, and we've got, you know, we've got 10 minutes. I do want people to get up and walk around too, because this is the break time. But I also want people to put questions in. So just open your mic and ask a question, please. Tulin, do you have a question? Your mic is open.
Yes, I do have a question. First of all, a comment and then a question. I'm really impressed with the work that you're doing through pedagogy and also creativity, artistic work. The question I have is how much the administrators in your institutions are also engaged in nonviolence on their campuses?
Do you want to take that, Pat?
I can start and then you come. I mean, I would say at a very symbolic way to start, the fact that our school experienced a shooting in 2006 has certainly led the college in our immediate aftermath to reflect on, what did that mean for us and how are we going to respond? And we decided that we weren't going to go towards metal detectors and armed guards along that kind of approach, which is much rarer in Canada, certainly than in the US. But that rather we would go towards thinking about peace. And so the college created a peace center and a number of other initiatives. So at sort of I wouldn't say a really deep level necessarily, but that's to some extent superficial, but still meaningfully superficial, if that makes sense. I think the college has embraced that idea that we want to find ways to promote peace and nonviolence. And then in terms of, I guess I'll hand it over to you in terms of where we're going now with the project and the kind of ways that the college seems to be supporting us.
Yeah, and I think this is what our college does well is they oftentimes will get out of the way of teachers and and people who want to develop projects that are seemingly provocative on some level, but that ultimately are about teaching, nonviolence theory, teaching about activism. Ultimately, our goal. So Pat and I have gotten grants, I think 2 years now. And our aim at first was to kind of develop this pedagogy. And now our aim is to kind of implement it in different places in the college. And, I guess because we have this outside funding, no one is saying no. But at the same time, I think Dawson is fairly good at saying, yeah, this could be innovative and we want to see where this goes. But again, the performative kind of activism is very strong there. And we're trying to bring it to that other level, or we're hoping to anyway, So our next project, which is called the Creative Collective for Change, is going to be about embedding the ideas of activism within college structures. So and studying activism within the college structure and what kind of how we've been affected and how we can change the way that we look at understand where violence comes from and understand our complicity in it, and then understand how we can work towards change together. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot to chew, but that's kind of where we're headed with it. And we'll see where that goes. We're not certain yet. It's really at the beginning stages, but we've had support a lot actually. Yeah.
And we tend to be, Kim and I have worked on a few projects together, and our strategy is always we do things and we just do things until someone tells us no, and largely they haven't told us no.
And I think that's very true. Like Pat and I developed a website for telling stories around sexual assault, and this was a couple of years before Me Too became really well known, and we saw that there was a need for it, but the college didn't, and it was a bit of a challenge to get it going. But then I kept I kept getting messages from students who said, I'm choosing this college because you have this project for sexual assault survivors, and I was like, okay, like that is really big, but I just kept reminding the administration that people are looking for this kind of thing, right? And that's what we have to do, anyway.
Michael, you have a question. I want to make sure I get everybody's question. Michael.
Let's see, I'm unmuted. Excellent.
Now you're fine. You're good.
Thank you for that was just shared with us. My question relates to binary culture.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that concept at all mentioned, except that I saw it frequently appear in the discussion relating to should we avoid triggering or risk triggering? Should we be complicit in violence, or should we be engage in complementarity that is more nonviolent?
Yeah, great. Thank you for bringing us on your walk, by the way.
And for me, I think
I'm going to
ultimately,
let Pat handle that one because I know you were talking about this recently in a lecture you did.
yeah,
Well, sorry, yeah. Did you want to add
Believe
anything
me,
else, Michael? I guess the position we're taking is absolutely to to challenge the binaries, all sorts of binaries, right? With the idea of finding the we and bringing in multiple multiple problems, so students can see interconnections and recognize other forms of suffering, right? We're constantly looking for that inclusive space. But yeah, we go in knowing that triggering is definitely possible, but we're also trying to find ways to do it in a way that is, I guess, gently provocative, perhaps. And I think in some ways, Gandhi likes to say that, although he's much more, I think, much more confrontational than maybe he wants to admit, right, in his thinking. But the idea of being gentle but persuasive and powerful. So we're definitely trying to find a space to to challenge binaries all the time. And Kim asked me the other day in a question. She said, "So what's the word you would do to define our goal?" And I said depolarization. I mean, Canada is not as polarized as the States, but we're heading down that path. And very quickly down that path, right? So I think that's where we're trying to position this pedagogy, and suggesting that all of us are in denial about some things is one way of trying to find that we all have work. We're all works in progress, to go back to that quote, which was Sue's originally in our discussions.
Yeah.
well, I do hear what you're saying, except that even in what you were saying, confrontational or non-confrontational, why not both? In other words, I don't see a great need to avoid confrontation or even to avoid triggering. What I see a need for is to be empathetic, sensitive, and encourage emotional intelligence as well as intellectual intelligence. If the intellectual shuts down, perhaps because of the film that I show, my hope is that might be a wedge into
Yeah, you're breaking up, Michael.
Yeah.
opening. And so I see both and I'm not sure in what you said.
Yeah, I think you're breaking.
I really wish we could hear all of that. I really
Well,
do. I think that the ideas of triggers, I think is really kind of important. I think we all want to, as teachers, show provocative things. We want people to be provoked, to have a reaction, and yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that there's an interesting avenue to explore there, particularly in perhaps the language that we use, etc. I think the main goal is not to say we don't want to trigger. I think the main goal is to say we do, but we don't want people to shut down and not listening to that trigger. You know what I mean? So if people are shut down going into it, what's the point? So I think that's kind of where we're trying to go, in the sense that framing things, allowing people to understand things from an entry point that is fairly easily accessible. That's why we use art a lot. Yeah, those kinds of things. But I know maybe Sue wants to say a few words too. I wasn't sure.
Oh yeah. Well, I was writing in the chat because I express myself better in writing anyway, I think, but
okay, sorry.
I really feel like we're on the same page with Michael, and he's picked up on I think the fact that our language is more subtle, I think, but definitely has the same objective of as Kim said, you know, did you use the word confrontation? No, it was
Michael did, I think.
Michael did, yeah.
yeah, and that, you know, that's I think what we are in hoping to make people braver about doing, with the understanding that it's always going into your classroom with the knowledge that, not like, oh, something happened today and there was confrontation, but that's always going to happen on sort of every level, a micro level to a macro level, all the time. So there are ways of approaching with that expectation, and a level of preparedness for, you know, breaking the shell a little bit through surprise. I guess, you know, does that make sense, Pat and Kim? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm going to have to bring it
Yeah.
to a close.
Yes,
Thank you, all three of you,